Watch your back, because once you're inside these prisons, there's no escape from the horror.
Open the door.
Imagine being locked up for 23 hours a day, surrounded by the world's most violent criminals, where survival depends on power, not justice. These aren't just prisons. They're nightmares built in concrete and steel. And as we go down the list, they only get worse. From prisons controlled by the very criminals they're meant to contain, to places where inmates are forced into slave labor, and even prisons where cannibalism has been reported. This list will make you rethink everything you know about life behind bars. But before we start, remember this. Not all prisons are run by guards. In some, the inmates call the shots. And in others, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to end up there. Let's begin. Petak Island Prison, Russia. This disclosure might be a bit different from the usual one, since oftentimes the prison is hidden deep down in the brutally cold waters of Russia's White Lake. Petak Island Prison is one of the most isolated and merciless places on Earth. This maximum security establishment acts as a prison for Russia's most serious criminals, serial killers, terrorists, and mafia bosses. The very people who have calmly awaited capture since deep-seated injustice became their handmaid. Inmates spend more than 22 hours a day in tiny, isolated cells with no human contact whatsoever. When they are allowed to go out, they stay in a tiny metal box no larger than a dog kennel. The silence is deafening, the loneliness unbearable. For many of them, the psychological torture is far worse than any physical punishment. This one is not just a prison, it is a place engineered to shatter men, piece by piece. You wouldn't believe how much more horrifying it gets. Armavir Prison, Armenia. Now let's move to Armenia, where the inmates aren't just prisoners, they're in control. Allegedly, it is controlled by a powerful criminal organization called the Thieves in Law. These powerful people of the underworld are not merely surviving in prison. They are thriving by controlling drug smuggling operations, illegal trades, and underground businesses from within the prison walls. And the worst part? The guards, too, are rumored to take orders from them. No one truly knows who the real leaders are. Orders are passed in coded messages, and any outsider trying to expose the hierarchy simply vanishes. On the scare scale, Armavir Prison may rank at a 2 out of 10, but don't let that fool you. This is just the beginning. We're only scratching the surface of the world's most dangerous prisons, and the next ones will make even the bravest think twice about stepping inside. Rikers Island, USA. Rikers Island, set aside for some of the most dangerous criminals, is among the oldest and most famously unreformed prisons in the United States. Nearly every form of violence against gang wars and solitary confinement has vitiated this place. With thousands of solitary housing units for isolation, Rikers could indeed expect an inmate to spend months, in some cases even years, alone in a tiny room without windows, thus virtually eliminating human interaction. The psychological damage for some is anyhow worse than the physical anguish. A number of inmates have suffered from acute mental health breakdowns, and reports of self-harm and suicides have gotten alarmingly high. Staff members feel vulnerable as riots and brutal fights can erupt at any moment. Camp 22, North Korea. If any prison in the world captures the very essence of a nightmarish spectacle, it is Camp 22 in North Korea. This giant facility is one of about 30 concentration camps that dot the entire nation. It has among the worst of horrors. An estimated 50 nations, Anner's pits, women, and even children are kept here for supposed crimes as trivial as murmuring against the state. Others have committed no crime whatsoever. They simply are related to someone the regime has somehow considered disloyal. Working in the coal mines for up to 12 hours a day with little food, these prisoners die within a brief period. Torture, beating, and execution are the norm. Those who dare to escape are subjected to punishment, meted out severely on them as an example to others. The level of secrecy surrounding Camp 22 is chilling. Few outsiders even know it exists, and even fewer have lived to tell the tale. San Quentin Prison, USA. Resting on the pristine California shores, San Quentin Prison constitutes one of the oldest and most infamous maximum security prisons in America. It is best recognized for one most terrifying reason: it holds the largest death row population in the whole country. Inside these walls, some of the most dangerous criminals in history have spent their final days awaiting execution. The prison has witnessed countless last breaths, and the eerie atmosphere is enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Fighting and rioting are common, and the tension is always high. With its dark history and deadly reputation, San Quentin earns a 4 out of 10 on the square meter. But trust us, things are about to get much worse. Carandiru Penitentiary, Brazil. If hell had to have one address, Carandiru Penitentiary, based in the city of São Paulo in Brazil, would be one strong contender. Before its closing in 2002, this prison was counted as one of the most congested and violent in the world. At the height of its capacity, the prison had 8,000 inmates, all under the watch of only 1,000 officers, an appalling ratio of 8-to-1. The imbalance of power in the prison saw inmates turning the prison into their own domain, instituting brutal rules of their own. If you were weak, you had no chance at all. The only way to survive was to make friends with ferocious gangs or act ruthlessly enough to instill fear in them. But it was not just violence that put Carandiru on the map. The prison's health crisis was something more deadly: malnutrition, unsanitary conditions, and an utter lack of medical care were the breeding grounds where disease outbreak after disease outbreak started. Most inmates suffered from HIV during that period, with nearly 20% of the HIV-infected population being a consequence of sharing needles and violence. However, what ultimately sealed Carandiru's dreadful historical status was the murder of 111 inmates, many of them unarmed, during a police assault after a riot in the prison in 1992. This mass murder sent shockwaves across the world, but for those inside, it was just another day in one of the world's worst prisons ever to exist: Guantanamo North, USA. You may have heard of Guantanamo Bay, but Guantanamo North, this ultra-secure prison in Indiana, is where the nation's worst criminals, including convicted terrorists, are locked away. It doesn't have the notoriety of its Cuban counterpart, but the conditions are every bit as brutal. Here, prisoners spend almost every hour in their cells, with only 3 chances in a week to get out. Even then, outside means a small, cage-like enclosure just big enough to move around. There is tight communication with the outside world, and it's under constant reality surveillance. The toll it takes psychologically upon inmates is severe, leaving several in extreme mental degradation due to long periods of isolation. Some would claim that this is a violation of human rights, but authorities at the prison argue that it is essential to have the worst of the worst locked up. Cebu Prison, Philippines. From a distance, the Cebu Provincial Detention and Rehabilitation Center might look like a harmless place. Its inmates are somewhat famous for dancing viral dances that entertain visitors. But under the peaceful exteriors, Cebu Prison is a time bomb waiting to explode. The main issue: overcrowding. While the design capacity is 1,600 inmates, the prison now holds over 3,000 inmates, turning the cells into cramped cages with the rapid spread of communicable diseases. Diseases like respiratory infections, skin diseases, and even tuberculosis are rampant due to the lack of proper sanitation and health care. Overcrowding is the main cause of violence in prisons. A compact space sets the mood for tension between the groups fighting over territory, leading to daily brawls, gang wars, and all-out riots. While you'd picture dancing in Cebu, every potential entertainment aspect quickly dissipates beyond the confines' walls. Guantanamo Bay, USA. Of such prisons, Guantanamo Bay is one of the worst to besiege the headlines. Inaugurated in 2002 in Cuba, it harbors suspected terrorists drawn from those captured in the War of Terror. Even though the number stands below 50, they are labeled as extremely dangerous. Most people find it frightening, however, by the real horrors of the interrogation methods, waterboarding, stress positions, and sleep deprivation that stoke global outrage. Some of them will spend many years without even an indication of charges while they go through inhuman conditions and solitude. Guantanamo is still open, despite the cries for closure. It has become a ghastly emblem of extended detention without trial and cruelty. Fear factor, 7 out of 10. Antanimora Prison, Madagascar. Antanimora Prison in Madagascar is a raw hell. Originally built for 800 inmates, it now holds over 4,000, making it one of the worst overcrowded prisons in the world. Inmates sleep in shifts since there is no space. Hygiene is non-existent, and the stench of waste is unbearable. They are served just one meal a day, a very poor nutritional diet of boiled cassava, which sends a large majority into malnutrition. Medical assistance is scarce, and diseases such as tuberculosis are rampant. Most inmates are pre-trial detainees who cannot even afford to make bail. Antanimora is therefore not simply a prison. It is a fight for survival that takes 2 slow years to die. Fear factor, 9 out of 10. Gitarama Prison, Rwanda. Gitarama Prison in Rwanda is overcrowded. Built for 600 prisoners, it now holds 6,000, 10 times its capacity. With no space to sit or lie down, prisoners stand for hours or even days, leading to gangrene as their feet rot from compression. The stench of decay fills the air, yet medical care is scarce. Some reports suggest starving inmates resort to cannibalism. Though unverified, the desperation inside makes it plausible. For many, survival is pure luck. Fear factor, 9.5 out of 10. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia, the most dangerous. If there's one prison on this list that stands above the rest in brutality, it's Black Dolphin Prison in Russia. This maximum security facility is home to the worst of the worst: serial killers, terrorists, rapists, and even cannibals. Inmates here have an average of 5 murders each on their records. With 0 chances of release, every prisoner here is serving a life sentence. But Black Dolphin ensures their existence is as miserable as possible. Prisoners are kept in total isolation in small, cage-like cells with no furniture, only a concrete slab to sleep on. Inmates are locked up for 23 hours a day, with the only break being a trip to a slightly larger cage for outdoor time. But make no mistake, prisoners at Black Dolphin never truly go outside. They're blindfolded whenever they leave their cells, ensuring they never memorize the prison's layout. When guards move inmates, they are forced to bend at the waist, hands cuffed behind their backs, as officers escort them in a chokehold. This posture makes escape attempts physically impossible. Escape? Forget about it. No one has ever escaped Black Dolphin, and no one ever will. Fear factor, 10 out of 10. If there's one thing this list proves, it's that prison isn't just about doing time. In some places, it's a fate worse than death. From overcrowding and disease in Gitarama to the mental and physical torture of Black Dolphin, these prisons aren't just facilities. They're hell on earth. There are places where losing it means losing everything. Which prison on this list shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments.